Hey, my name is Kobe Bryant, and I love to play basketball.
I'm Aaron Meyer, and you're listening to the 19.9 Podcast. Today, we are talking to Mike Seilski, author of The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality.
In the aftermath of his death, everybody was kind of looking at him, it seemed to me nationally, through the prism of his years with the Lakers. But I knew that he had this origin story.
We also discussed the podcast, I Am Kobe, that sprung from the book Around the Microcassette Interviews of Kobe, exploring his own beginnings.
When it came to the podcast, though, that was a little more personal, both for me and for Kobe. You know, you can hear his voice, and you can also hear mine.
Now, on to the show.
Jim, isn't it amazing when Michigan can keep this game to a 19-foot, 9-inch game inside that three-point line? It's all there.
Welcome to the 19.9 Podcast. Today we've got Mike Seilski, author, sports columnist, radio host, and my favorite sports podcast of the year, I Am Kobe. I know this because I was reminded recently that I listened to 31 days of podcasts last year. So it means something to me that this was my favorite. So welcome to the podcast, Mike. How are you, man?
I'm great, Aaron. It's sobering to hear that you spent 9% of your year listening to podcasts.
I know. Well, you can multitask doing a podcast. You know, some mowing the lawn. You know, I'm not just focused in on it, but I was pretty locked in on this one. But I want to start you off here and ask about your basketball or sports origin story. You're a sports columnist. So how'd you get into sports as a kid?
Oh, I'm the same way that I'm sure millions of kids have gotten into it. My father was really into sports. I had family members, uncles, grandparents who loved it. And growing up just outside Philadelphia in the suburbs around the city, it didn't take much to be an Eagles fan, a Flyers fan, a Sixers fan, a Phillies fan, all of those things. And as I grew up, I enjoyed writing. It was something that I was pretty good at. My parents were both English majors in college. My mom was a school teacher for 25 years and a librarian for a few years before that. I grew up reading the Philadelphia Inquirer every day and loving the writers there. So it was the thing I always wanted to do. Wow. And when I got to college, I started writing for the student newspaper, and I loved the feeling that having written gave me. I didn't necessarily love the process of writing because it's a challenge.
Yeah.
I love the finished product and the reaction I could get from people, and I knew it was what I wanted to do. That's
amazing. So I have to ask this just too. Thinking about journalism in the 21st century, it's incredible. Like, you've kind of bridged two eras, and I think you're kind of in a unique position to storytell about that. So how has your transition been from like growing up in an era where you like you said, you're reading the newspaper? You know, it's like sometimes I walk by a newspaper and I'm almost startled to see it. I'm like, I'm a small town. It's like there's not even places that stock them hardly anymore. They come out weekly, and but I do miss it because when I was growing up, boy, going to a coffee shop or getting that newspaper was something I really like treasured. It was really fun to pick it up and leaf through it.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that because it's something that I've spoken about with my best friend who came up in the business a similar way and has since left it. And he basically pointed out that I'm like the last member of the generation who did it the way it used to be done.
Yeah.
Because that path just isn't available anymore, where you start out covering football and high school football on a Friday night and high school basketball during the week for your local weekly or daily, and you just kind of work your way up. That when I was in college or even in high school, I knew the path you had to take to get to where I wanted to go. Nowadays, I'll have college students ask me, hey, if I wanted to be a sports writer for the Inquirer, what would you recommend I do? And I'm like, I don't have the first idea. Just write and read as much as you can.
Yeah.
And, to your point about bridging those two generations, I do think that as long as you are smart and versatile and you are able to report well and write well and speak well, there will be opportunities for you. You have to be willing to put in the time and the work And I do think the basics of journalism and reporting still matter. Yeah. The question is, what form is that going to take? Are you going to, write for a website? Are you going to be a long form podcaster? Are you going to try to work for a local news outlet? Or whatever the case may be. But I think the foundations of the profession still apply.
So just how those came to be, because this type of storytelling, before we started recording, I was talking about how I've really enjoyed this year, the longer form storytelling, and lamented a little bit of some of that going away. But the time that it takes, the journalistic skill, because that is a real skill. And I just wanted to see kind of, first off, where you dove into that, the story about Kobe. What was the spark for you?
Sure. So when Kobe died in January of 2020, in my role as a sports columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, I ended up writing about him quite a bit. And, I would cover Kobe and write about him anytime the Lakers would come to Philadelphia, or if there happened to be something big in the news about him. I didn't know him when he was at Lower Merion High School, but I interacted with him a few times over the years. And I did know a couple of people who were really close to him, notably Greg Downer, his high school coach at Lower Merion, and this guy who we're going to talk about, Jeremy Treatman, who had been a friend and coach and confidant and almost like a PR rep for Kobe back when Kobe was in high school. So after Kobe died, I ended up writing a lot about him in the months after his death for the Inquirer. And it occurred to me that in the aftermath of his death, everybody was kind of looking at him, it seemed to me, nationally through the prism of his years with the Lakers. And I understood that because he joined the Lakers when he was 17. Yeah. And he died when he was when he was 41. So it was almost like he had grown up before the country's eyes in Los Angeles. But I knew that he had this, like, to use your phrase, origin story that people in the Philadelphia area knew really well, but I didn't know that people around the country and around the globe knew as well. And I thought, boy, if I can do Batman Begins for the Black Mamba, that's really a cool story, and it would be kind of a timeless story. So that was the inspiration for it. So once I got that idea, I reached out to Jeremy, I reached out to Greg. They agreed to help me, and I was kind of off and running on the book and the podcast.
That's great. That's a great elevator pitch there. Batman Begins for the Black Mamba.
That's exactly the one I used.
Rig. Did you really?
That's exactly the one I used.
That's fantastic. Okay, so let's talk a little podcast then first.
Okay.
The episodes are really well put together, but you've got, again, you talked about this writing background, and that's kind of like your zone. So I'm thinking, like, are you starting out with a podcast in mind, or how did that part come up in the process?
So actually the book came first.
Okay.
So my agent, Susan Canavan, who is wonderful, works for a literary agency called Waxman Literary. And one of the things that Waxman does is they've gone on and formed kind of a separate company that produces media to accompany the books that their authors publish and write. And they usually almost exclusively do it for narrative nonfiction. So once I got the book contract, once St. Martin's Press agreed to publish The Rise, my agency, the guy who runs it, Scott Waxman, reached out to me and said, "Hey, look, you've got this audio, or what we thought was audio, of interviews with Kobe from when he was 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. We could probably turn that into an accompanying podcast to go along with the book." And I thought it was a great idea. And so after I finished writing the actual manuscript to the book, I set to kind of taking the audio and writing scripts around it and around some other interviews I had done and would do to build this podcast that wouldn't be just a repetition, a repeating of the book, but would kind of go into some different places and approach Kobe's story from a different perspective.
Mentioned the audio, you're glossing over that, but that is incredible to hear his voice at such a young age. He sounds I mean, it's Kobe, but it also is different. So I'd love, just to share that's in there, how it is, but I won't ruin everything, but just to tell, what was it like finding that? And, what kind of key was that to unlocking some of this other, the book and the podcast?
It was completely essential. And there's actually an amazing story behind it, Aaron. So here's the thing. Jeremy Treatman, who was Kobe's buddy and confidant back when Kobe was in high school. Jeremy was in his, I guess, you'd say late 20s, early 30s at the time.
Yeah.
And he had been writing for the Philadelphia Inquirer and had gotten to know Kobe that way from writing about him. And then he stopped writing for the Inquirer so that he could come on board at Lower Merion to be kind of Kobe's PR agent. He was the guy who would set up all the interviews for Kobe and handle all the media requests and things like that. So toward the end of Kobe's senior year, Jeremy got the idea of trying to collaborate with Kobe on a memoir. And it would be called My Freshman Year in the NBA. And it would be all about Kobe making the jump from Lower Merion directly to the NBA.
Yeah.
So they sat down for the series of interviews on a tape recorder and on micro cassettes.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I did too.
Yeah.
And they did that for several months. And as it turned out, the project fell through. Jeremy couldn't get a book contract. Kobe had moved on to the NBA in Los Angeles. And it wasn't meant to be.
Great.
So I've known Jeremy for 25 years. He's kind of a mover and a shaker in the world of Philadelphia basketball.
Okay.
I had known him. He had been the radio play-by-play voice for LaSalle's men's basketball program,
Okay.
my alma mater.
Nice.
So I've known him for a long time.
Yeah.
So when I reached out to him for the book, he said, I had these tapes with Kobe, but I don't know where they are. I haven't been able to find them in 20 years, but I'll look for them. And I'm like, okay, that'd be great. If you find them, I wasn't counting on him finding them. So I'm progressing along with my research and my reporting, and I'm writing the book. And my deadline for the manuscript is February of 2021. On December 22nd, 2020, at 8:00 at night, I am home and my cell phone rings. And it's Jeremy.
Yeah.
Jeremy is getting ready to move from his townhouse in Philly, Florida. And he's been cleaning out his garage. And he gets on the phone and he says, Mike, I found the tapes. They were in a box on a shelf in his garage. Wow. So the next morning, 2 days before Christmas, I drive over to his townhouse. He hands me a Ziploc bag full of about 20 microcassettes of interviews with Kobe that no one has ever heard before. It's Kobe talking about the first time he met Michael Jordan. It's Kobe talking about taking Brandy to his senior prom. Kobe's relationship with his parents. All kinds of stuff from 17, 18-year-old Kobe. Not only that, to give you an idea of how old these tapes were, Jeremy still had the recorder that he used to record them, but the recorder, the little place where you put the batteries in.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't have the cover for that. That had popped off. So you had to tape the batteries into the recorder so that the recorder would have power.
That's
and
amazing.
He handed all this over to me, and I started listening to these tapes, and I digitized them. I converted them into digital files so that eventually we could use them for the podcast. And man, I would get chills listening to them. Going through them, I went through all the recordings and got an extra month on my book deadline so that I could weave all that material into the manuscript.
Yeah. That is incredible. What's so cool about it and why it makes the book incredible and the podcast is, again, it fills out this whole thing. I know you being a similar age bracket as myself, we wanted access to the athletes like they have today. Like they didn't have Instagram accounts and TikTok and I mean to have that behind the curtain view of Kobe growing up just fills in a personality and a dynamic to him that I just did not know about. He's so polished by the time he gets to the NBA, and he has some things that happen to him that makes him more guarded, and then he's got a family. And so this just fills in so many little spaces for the Kobe that I know. And I think you do a good job of that in you use some of these to broaden his story in some ways. And I really appreciated that.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I wanted the book to be, and the podcast too, I wanted them both to be intimate but universal, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I wanted people to be able to read the book or listen to Kobe's voice on the podcast and think, wow, it's like I'm in the room with him. But also, the book and the pod would be dealing with subjects that you didn't necessarily have to be a basketball freak to enjoy.
Yeah.
And, I'd like to think I accomplished that in both of those, that some of the stuff that Kobe gets into in the tapes and that the book and the pod get into are kind of universal to everybody. Everybody can relate at some level.
Yeah, I mean, there's a Boys to Men reference in there, and you said Brandy, and so it is weaving these like '90s icons in there, and how he interacted, meeting Michael Jordan, and these things just broaden it out. But it does get into a real narrow story too about him growing up in high school. And you even interject your thoughts, which I thought was interesting from a journalistic perspective, and I'm sure doing the podcast version, you probably had to kind of assume a different character. I know you do some stuff on the radio too, but I was curious how you decided to put yourself in your thoughts into the podcast as you were going through it, and what like your process was for deciding like when to do that.
Sure. So it was two different things, the book and the pod.
Yeah.
Because Kobe is such a complex figure, and there's light to him and there's dark to him, and there's a lot of gray in between. So when it came to the book, I really tried very hard not to insert myself in there. I wanted it to be accessible to as many people as possible. And I didn't want to stack the deck when it came to some of the issues that can't come up about Kobe, whether you're talking about Aurora, Colorado, and the rape charges, things like that, some of the stuff that happens in high school. There's even an anecdote that I reveal about a seminar in a particularly sensitive topic that he tries to walk out of. Things like that. I just wanted to kind of put them out there for the reader to draw his or her own conclusions about. When it came to the podcast, though, that was a little more personal, both for me and for Kobe. You can hear his voice, and you can also hear mine. I'm narrating the podcast. So when we were producing it, and I worked with a great team at this company, Diversion Media, to put the podcast together, we felt like it was imperative to get more of my perspective in there to connect directly with the listener. With the book, I wanted to stay out of the way as much as possible beyond just my writing style. But in the podcast, we do get into a little bit of, as you put it, kind of my connection to Kobe, insofar as we were members of the same generation. I was an undergraduate at LaSalle University at the time. His father, Joe, was an assistant basketball coach there. And there was all this scuttlebutt about maybe Kobe would come to LaSalle and resurrect the program. So those sorts of elements played into my decision and our decision to say, you know what, let's make the pod a little more personal than the book.
Yeah, I think it works because it does, whether you want to or not, if you're narrating something like that, you end up being a character in the in there. So it's like if you try not to, it almost feels less natural than just being letting it happen. So I thought it worked, but I appreciate appreciate you sharing kind of what your thought process was, because I know as a journalist that had to be kind of like
it was weird, man.
Yeah, you're really, like, wait a second, I got to talk about myself or what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's fun. You're 100% right. Every time I would write one of the scripts for the episodes, the producers and editors I worked with, who were great, the first thing they would come back to me with was, "We need more of you in this." And I'm like, man, I'm not used to doing that. But they were like, no, we give us your take in a sentence or two in this part of the episode or that part of the episode. And by the time we got to the end of the process of writing it, I felt a little more comfortable doing that.
Okay, you talk a little bit about, this is just you probably wouldn't know, but I'm going to ask you to interject here again. Do you think he would have ever gone to college? Like, was there any part of him that would have gone? And if so, which school do you think, if he would have had to pick? Like the one and done rule is in there. Where's he going? All
right, so if there was a mandate that Kobe had to go to college, let's say the one and done rule, like you said, he would have gone to Duke. Okay. I don't think there's any doubt about that. That said, he did not visit personally any college or university when he was in high school. Yeah. His coach did. Greg Downer went to Kentucky and spent a weekend there when Rick Pitino was trying to woo Kobe.
Oh boy!
Downer,
you might have to chase down the stories of that. What's Downer got to say about that?
He enjoyed the weekend, but it didn't mean Kobe was going to go there and play for Pitino.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, he entertained the thought of going to LaSalle when he was an undergrad in high school, when he was a freshman or sophomore, even a little bit into his junior year. But In the summer of 1995, he gets invited by John Lucas, who was the Sixers head coach at the time, to scrimmage and play pickup against pros and college players in Philly, because that's what was done back then. Is guys would get together and scrimmage, and they would play every day at St. Joseph's University, right on City Avenue in West Philly. And Kobe held his own there, and then some against those guys. So once that happened, Kobe's like, you know what? I don't need to go to college. I want to get to the NBA as fast as I can, so I'm not even going to bother going to Duke or going to North Carolina and forget LaSalle. I'm going straight to the league.
Yeah, it was really in the zeitgeist then. We had Tim Thomas on, and he was talking something similar. He was going to the McDonald's All-American game, but hadn't even like talked to anyone. And then just kind of one visit to Villanova, and they were going to play him at small forward, and that was it. He just decided to go. He liked the guys, so just the difference in time again between like these guys aren't the brands that they are today. Even the, Kobe at that level wasn't, didn't have that national like media circus surrounding him. He was obviously known locally, but sometimes that's the first time people see him is that maybe that one McDonald's game. It's just a little bit different.
Yeah, you're right. And there was a ton of skepticism back then too about the idea of any high school player, let alone one who was 6'6" and a guard and built the way Kobe was. The idea that he would make the jump, people couldn't wrap their minds around it. It was one thing in 1995 for Kevin Garnett to do it. Kevin Garnett was 7 feet tall and ripped and a man at age 18. Yeah. Kobe was not. And so there was a lot of backlash to him when he holds that press conference with the beige suit and the sunglasses on his head, and he says, "I'm taking my talent to the NBA." Man, there were a lot of people saying, "Who does this kid think he is?" But Kobe, I had a number of people tell me Kobe was operating on a different level, even at that age, from everybody else.
Well, that little detail right there that LeBron copied, people are gonna have to listen to that because you get into that, and that was so much fun. Again, like bringing more present day stuff into that, and talking about the sunglasses on the head, just the character that Kobe was trying to fit into these different worlds, being such a unique upbringing and being in that where he was in the Philadelphia suburbs there. I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah, there was a lot going on there. I mean, he lived basically in Italy for 8 full years, before his family moves back to Lower Merion Township for good in December of 1991. And so he arrives in the middle of the 8th grade year. He actually plays baseball for the baseball team at his middle school in 8th grade. He tries to play soccer, entering Lower Merion as a 9th grader, and his family and Greg Downer quickly put the kibosh on that. Like, no, you're going to play basketball. Yeah. And, think about that time, like Lower Merion Township, the main line in Philadelphia, is very diverse, but it's got this stereotype of old money, kind of waspy Protestant, a lot of guys named Thad and a lot of women named Buffy kind of a thing. That's the stereotype. And so Kobe kind of drops out of the sky, almost like he's an alien, and he's got to adjust to this. He hasn't had the same experience that all the white kids in school have had. He hasn't had the same experience that all the black kids in school have had. And so he's got to kind of figure out his way there for a while. And it was rough in the beginning for him. He was a fish out of water there for a while, but basketball allows him to kind of, as you said, move in these different worlds and eventually find his place. And by the time he graduates, I mean, he's the king of the school in every regard.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, bring Brandy to the biggest pop star on the world to your prom, could at least set you apart a little bit.
just a tad. It's funny. It was fun to go back and review that stuff. And in talking about the book and the pod, it's like, I have to remind people who Brandy was.
I know, you do, yeah.
If you were a kid
Not
back
at the time,
then, everybody was in love with Brandy, my God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the fact that he met her through Boys to Men is just like ultimate, like that old VH1 show. Like, I love the 90s episode.
The 90s, man, all over again. That's exactly right.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the book, The Rise, Kobe Bryant, and the Pursuit of Immortality. Just the book and the tape, some of the material obviously crosses over, but they're not the same at all. So I would just want to see where you conceptualize, now hearing that the book came first, like where do you start with a project like this? You've got this kind of sensitive subject after his passing, and you've got kind of how you frame it up for people when you dive into something kind of broad like that to start?
Well, Aaron, usually when I start to write, I think first and foremost about what have I reported, what have I witnessed, what have I seen. And I was at Lower Merion 2 days after Kobe's death, when Greg Downer, his coach, spoke publicly. I saw the memorial. I was able to get a sense of the place. And that gave me the idea of opening the book with the aftermath of his death through the prism of the Lower Merion community, because I felt like, aside from the Inquirer, where I work, there weren't too many places that were kind of examining Kobe's death from that perspective.
Yeah.
What was its effect on the people who knew him when he was a kid? So that was my starting point, was, okay, let me get into the immediate aftermath of his death and kind of get that out of the way, so to speak. Now, that first chapter, I've had people tell me, man, that's a hard chapter to read because it's pretty detailed, not about the crash, but about the aftermath of it. And it puts people back to where they were in that mind frame of when he had died. And then the final scene in that first chapter is Greg Downer flying back from Kobe's memorial service in Los Angeles. And he's on the plane and he's starting to gather his thoughts. He's writing an essay about Kobe. He's writing his thoughts about Kobe. And it's almost as if he's traveling back and remembering Kobe as he was. And so I used that as the vehicle to kind of start the beginning of Kobe's life and his journey from being born to, the moment he leaves high school and kind of moves on to the NBA. One of the things I did do in the book that was very purposeful was the first chapter is the helicopter crash. And I won't give away the ending of the book, but the last chapter, the book ends with a plane landing. And I did that on purpose. I wanted to kind of set those up as kind of the two brackets, my borders for the narrative. And from there, it was simply a matter of trying to figure out which storylines I could carry throughout the book. There's a good bit about Kobe's recruitment by, again, my alma mater, LaSalle, because I wanted to show kind of how Kobe was the sun in this world, and there were planets that were orbiting and affected by him. And that was a good vessel for that, a good metaphor for that. So we get into that. We get into Kobe's search for his identity as a black kid in suburban Philly. There's a lot of time spent on Lower Merion's his senior season and the run to their state championship, and kind of the sociological dynamics of the Philly area at that time. So that was how I conceived it. I wanted to be able to show Kobe. My goal, I guess, was if you read about this book about Kobe's early life, you would understand virtually everything about him that came after it, the man he became through the story of the child he had been.
Yeah. I think you do a good job too of capturing the fact that this is something probably that most people have experienced, where you go back to your hometown and you talk to someone that hasn't seen you in 20 years and you're still that person. And you kind of, it's like this little time capsule. If you talk to those people and they can fill in that region of your life, almost like you never left it, and just pick up right in that moment, like a record, needle dropping.
That's so insightful, Aaron. And you're exactly right. All of Kobe's old classmates and teammates who I spoke to, they don't think of him first and foremost as the guy who won 5 rings with the Lakers and 2 Olympic gold medals and had all the controversies with Shaq and Phil Jackson and all that stuff. They think of the kid who sat next to them in English class, or the kid who rapped during the post-prom party, or the guy who, sitting next to them on the team bus, used to white knuckle it when the bus would go across a bridge over a body of water because he was afraid of heights. That's what they remember. They remember Kobe, the teenager. They don't remember Kobe, the Laker. And that was really important to me. I wanted the book to be a moment in time in that regard.
Yeah, it comes off that way. I want to come back to treatment because I'm a little curious about your relationship with him. How did he take all this? Because you mentioned like he's got these tapes. He has this plan to to write a book himself about Kobe's freshman year. I'm hoping that it was kind of a baton pass, but I can imagine it'd be a little bittersweet too to see this this handing off a baby to someone else or something like that.
Well, you know what? Jeremy was awesome throughout the entire process. He looked at it like the book that I couldn't do
Mhm.
is getting written anyway. And
Yeah.
and all he wanted was to be a part of it. He wanted to have his aspect of Kobe's life and Kobe's story be represented
Hmm.
and respected. He was a huge help to me in the book. He was a huge help to me in the podcast.
That's awesome.
I mean, we've been friends for a long time
Yeah.
anyway, but I'm sure there were some feelings on his part,
Mhm.
exactly as you described. But it never came up during our conversation,
That's
and it
good.
still hasn't come up.
Yeah.
He's just been awesome, and I can't say enough good things about him and Greg Downer and so many people connected to Kobe one way or another who were willing to help me with both of these projects.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's great to hear. You know kind of that you've handed something that you care about into good hands if you can let it go in that way and just kind of enjoy being part of the process rather than being bitter about what didn't happen for you. That takes a lot of character to do that too.
Yeah, it does. And what was one of the cooler parts of the projects was that I was able to reach out to people who, on the one hand, let me put it this way. I reached out to a number of people who didn't want to talk to me because the wounds of Kobe's death were too fresh for them.
I bet.
And yeah, totally understandable. But the benefit of reaching out and contacting as many people as I did was that I tracked down and talked to people who knew Kobe well in this stage of his life, but had never spoken publicly about him before. And they were eager to do that because they felt like those aspects of his life that they were involved in had never been given the proper treatment. So, for example, Kobe, in his freshman year at Lower Merion, joined the Lower Merion Student Voice, which was basically the Black Student Union organization at Lower Merion. I never knew this. This had never been reported anywhere. And it was really, I was jazzed kind of to find this out. And it was something that I spent a good bit of time on in the book because I thought this was really important to his development as a person, his search for his identity. Who am I? What does it mean to be Black in this environment that I'm in, given the fact that I've lived abroad for 8 years and I didn't see very many faces or people who looked like me. And the people who knew him through that endeavor on his part, like, were really open and really great in talking with me about that because nobody had ever talked to them about this before. And they were grateful that someone wanted to talk to them about this connection to Kobe. So that part of it was really rewarding.
Yeah. And I think too, I found it very interesting, his teammates, the positive relationships that he had, because he often gets portrayed as this kind of divisive figure with his teammates in the NBA, but really seemed to capture, and carry this group along with him. And they had this kind of this bond that they really have, which often happens in high school where it's a little more egalitarian in terms of like, socioeconomic status and, how much coverage you're not worried. You just want to be with this guy. And that came off, and I enjoyed kind of hearing about that. And you could see kind of maybe how the seeds of how that came around eventually for him.
Yeah, it really did, because when he got there, he was not particularly well liked by the older teammates. He's starting as a freshman. He's basically a ball hog. He's kind of shooting the ball every time he gets it. There were guys who resented him for that. Lower Merion went 4-20 his freshman year. It ought to be impossible to go 4-20 with Kobe Bryant on your team, but they did. And it took him growing up over the course of the 4 years, getting older, getting more mature. And it took the teammates, as you said, around him kind of understanding who he was. There's one pivotal moment in the book and in his senior season where the Lower Merion Aces lose a game they should have won. And Greg Downer kind of holds a team meeting and kind of chews everybody out. And he goes around the room kind of calling out all the kids on the team for the things that they're not doing. And then he calls out Kobe kind of for saying, it's hard to play with you. You have to give these guys kind of room to make mistakes and, understand that it is going to be a challenge for them to play with a player of your caliber. And you've got to give each other grace here. And they didn't lose another game after that. So it was, it's those kind of moments that I think get to what you're talking about, kind of the bonding of Kobe with these kids who knew him when he was 17 and 18.
Greg should have talked to Phil a little earlier. I think that sounds like I've heard something Phil Jackson said to him years down the line. Those two should have been in more contact.
Yeah. Well, it was much different once Kobe got to the NBA.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be honest here.
Yeah.
We can talk about Kobe being portrayed as a hard teammate to get along with.
Yeah. Okay.
He was tough to get along with.
Okay, fair.
You know, I mean, you're talking about a guy, Aaron, who, when he entered the NBA at age 17, on a team with Shaquille O'Neal, Eddie Jones, Nick Van Exel, thought that he should have been the centerpiece of that team. Like, we're going to win a championship, and I'm going to be the star player. And couldn't understand why Del Harris wouldn't just give him the ball and tell everybody else to get out of the way.
Yeah, this old school coach. Yeah, Del Harris would have been really interesting to talk to Greg too.
Exactly.
Like, oh boy, this guy got on my team. Okay.
Yeah, exactly
right.
right.
Well, Mike, I so appreciate your time tonight. I want to get you out of here. I want people definitely, it's stocking stuffer season. So The Rise, Kobe Bryant, The Pursuit of Immortality, or I Am Kobe is the podcast. Both of them are worth checking out. I've got some run and gun style questions for you here on the way out. So we got to start with Philly food, but I need best secret Philly food spot.
All right. Well, it's not really a secret, but it is my favorite restaurant in the city.
Okay.
It is Ralph's Italian Restaurant. It is the oldest family-owned Italian restaurant in America. It is incredible. As they say in The Godfather, try the veal. It's the best in the city.
Okay. Amazing. All right. Best hoops game you've seen recently?
Well, depends how far back you want to go recently. I will say
Go back a little.
Yeah. During the year, the best 3 nights of hoops I covered were the Big East tournament, Villanova making its run and capping that by beating Creighton in the championship game, where Justin Moore and in particular Colin Gillespie on a sprained ankle just carried that team to a Big East championship. And of course, we didn't know at the time that Jay Wright, the coach, had already made his decision that he was going to retire at the end of the year. So that victory really had a lot of meaning to Jay and to that team. And the games themselves were just great. Madison Square Garden is awesome. So those 3 nights were really cool.
Amazing. All right. Favorite Kobe quote or basketballism or saying or what do you got there?
Yeah. So I had to write this down.
Okay.
So it was not by Kobe. It was said about Kobe. I should correct that. He did say it. He said it to a couple of different people, including his English teacher, Jeannie Mastriano, who was kind of his academic and intellectual mentor. He told her that he used to dribble himself to sleep at night. And I think that one line just kind of captures everything there is to capture about Kobe. It's the commitment that he made to be great and the cost of that commitment too. The idea that he was lonely a lot of the time. He at times would struggle to form relationships with lasting relationships with friends. Some of the things that we get into in the book and the podcast are tied into that. Just that single-minded focus that all I'm worried about first and foremost is becoming the greatest basketball player on the planet. It's amazing that he had that focus as young as he did, but it wasn't as if it came without its drawbacks.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great one. I'll have to remember that one. All right. Favorite place to watch a game? It might be at Madison Square Garden or maybe a Philly spot to see it. If there's like a gym in Philly, that's great to go to games at.
Got to go with the Palestra, the cathedral, the mecca of college basketball. I know I'm talking to somebody from Indiana. I get it. But the Palestra is just awesome. I was there last week for a Big Five doubleheader. It was kind of disappointing. There weren't as many people there as there could have been or should have been, but the Palestra is still the best.
Yeah, it's on my bucket list. I definitely want to see a game there. It's one of those that I've just seen enough photos of and heard enough about that I just want to kind of feel the bones of the place.
Yeah, and believe me, you will if you go.
Okay, that's amazing. All right, well, again, so appreciate your time tonight, and tell people where they can follow you or about any upcoming projects you've got coming up.
Sure. So I'm on Twitter at Mike Seilski, MikeSielski. You can find my work at the Philadelphia Inquirer's website, inquirer.com. And I'm actually in the midst of researching right now another book. It's going to be on a history of the slam dunk,
Ooh,
kind of basketball in America through the dunk. So we're talking about MJ, Dr. J, the NCAA's decision to ban it for a decade.
Yeah.
What it meant to Black and American culture. Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, the first dunk in an official game at the 1936 Olympics in Berlin.
Amazing.
There's just all kinds. Ja Morant. There's all kinds of places this can take you, and I'll be working on that for the next year or two.
I love it. We've got some Harlem Globetrotters content coming up, and that they've certainly played a role in that for sure too. So
absolutely.
Well, thanks again so much, and appreciate it. We'll have to have you back on and talk about the dunk in a year or so.
Anytime, man. Thank you so much, Aaron. This has been awesome.
Okay. Take care, man. Thank you for listening to the 19.9 podcast. If you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do. And while you're at it, leave us a rating or review. 5 stars only, like the basketball camp. We also have links to all of 19.9 social media so you never miss a release. Until next time.